I learned on a Tuesday morning that snow could be weaponized, when I found my driveway completely blocked by a 6-foot wall of packed snow that definitely had not been there when I went to bed. The municipal snowplow had come through our subdivision of Lakeside Commons in Rochester, Minnesota during the night, but this was different. This was deliberate. This was war. My name is Brandon Fletcher, and I had been living in this community for 3 years without major incident, until 6 months ago when Carolyn Montgomery took over as president of the Lakeside Commons Homeowners Association. The woman was a menace wrapped in a pantsuit, armed with a clipboard and an encyclopedic knowledge of every obscure bylaw ever written. She was 52, drove a white Lexus SUV that she kept immaculately clean even in Minnesota winters, and had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable ever since I painted my front door navy blue instead of the approved forest green. But blocking my driveway with what had to be several tons of snow was a new low, even for her. I stood there in my work clothes, coffee mug in hand, staring at the mountain of white that prevented me from backing my truck out. I had a job site to get to. I was the foreman for Fletcher Construction, my own small company that specialized in residential renovations, and I had a team waiting for me 30 miles away in Byron. We were on a tight deadline for a kitchen remodel that was already behind schedule because of the weather. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures, documenting the blockage from multiple angles. The snow was clearly not a natural accumulation. Someone had deliberately pushed it there, packing it high and wide across the entire width of my driveway apron. The edges were too clean, too intentional. This was the work of a plow or snow blower, wielded with malicious intent. My neighbor, Gerald Harrison, was scraping ice off his windshield across the street. He saw me and shook his head sympathetically. Gerald was 73, retired from IBM, and had lived in Lakeside Commons since the development was built 20 years ago. He had stories about the HOA that would make your hair stand on end. Saw it happen around 6 this morning, he called over. That new snow removal company the HOA hired. They made 3 passes in front of your place, pushing it all right there. The driver kept looking at something on his phone like he was following instructions. My jaw clenched. Of course. Carolyn had pushed through a vote last fall to hire a new snow removal contractor, some company out of Rochester proper that charged triple what the old local guy charged. The vote had been contentious. I had voted against it along with about 30% of the homeowners, but Carolyn had gotten her way. She always did. I called my lead carpenter, Dave Morrison, and told him I would be late. Then I went inside, changed into my work overalls, and headed to my detached garage where I kept my equipment. I had a small Kubota tractor with a front loader that I used for various projects. It was not quite heavy enough for serious snow removal, but it would have to do. I also had a commercial-grade snow blower that I had bought 2 years ago after a particularly brutal winter. The snow blower would not cut it for this job. The snow was too packed, too heavy. I needed the tractor. It took me 40 minutes to clear enough space to even get the tractor out of the garage. By the time I fired up the Kubota and started attacking the snowbank, it was nearly 8 in the morning and I was already furious. Each scoop of snow I lifted revealed just how much work had gone into creating this obstruction. The snow was not just piled, it was compressed, layered, mixed with ice chunks and road salt. This had taken effort and time. As I worked, I noticed Carolyn's front door open 3 houses down. She stepped out onto her covered front porch, still in her bathrobe, holding a coffee mug. She watched me for a long moment, and even from 50 yards away, I could see the smug satisfaction on her face. That was when the idea hit me. I had two options. I could pile the snow on my own front lawn, making my property look messy and giving Carolyn yet another thing to complain about, or I could deliver it back to its rightful owner. My property line extended along the street, and there was nothing in the HOA bylaws that said I could not temporarily place snow on the public right-of-way while I figured out where to put it permanently. And Carolyn's house was public right-of-way adjacent too. I adjusted my approach, angling the tractor loader so that, instead of dumping the snow to the side, I was creating a neat pile that could be easily transported. The Kubota could not drive on the street legally without proper registration, but I had my truck with a plow attachment in the garage. It would take some work to get it out, but it would be worth it. 45 minutes later, I had my truck free and the plow blade attached. The pile of snow I had created from clearing my driveway was enormous, probably 8 feet high and 12 feet across at the base. I began the process of pushing it down the street, working the truck back and forth, moving the mass of white frozen water closer and closer to Carolyn's house. Gerald had come out to watch, along with several other neighbors. Doris Chen from 2 doors down was filming on her phone. Marcus and Jennifer Webb, the young couple who had just moved in last spring, were standing on their front steps with their morning coffee, looking like they were watching the best show in town. I was breaking no laws. I was moving snow on a public street. The city did not care where snow ended up as long as it was not blocking traffic or creating a hazard. And I was very carefully ensuring that every bit of snow I moved stayed within legal boundaries. Carolyn came out of her house as I made my final approach. She was dressed now, wearing her typical business casual outfit with sensible winter boots. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was the color of a stop sign. "Brandon Fletcher, what do you think you are doing?" she demanded, marching down her driveway. I rolled down my window. "Morning, Carolyn. Just dealing with this mysterious snowbank that appeared in my driveway. You would not know anything about that, would you? That snow is municipal property. The city snowplows have every right to deposit snow wherever they deem necessary." "Funny thing about that," I said, keeping my voice calm and pleasant. "I checked with the city. Their plows came through at 3 in the morning. This snowbank appeared at 6 courtesy of the HOA's private contractor. I have a witness." Gerald waved from across the street. Carolyn's expression tightened. "The HOA has the right to manage snow removal in common areas and to ensure that all properties maintain proper drainage and access. My driveway is not a common area. It is private property. And you deliberately had it blocked, which prevented me from accessing a public street. That is actually illegal, Carolyn. It is called obstruction, and I could file a police report." "You would not dare," I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Try me." "Now, I have all this snow that mysteriously appeared on my property, and I need to put it somewhere while I decide what to do with it. I think your front porch looks like it could use some winter decoration." Her eyes widened. "You cannot do that. Watch me." I put the truck in gear and made my final push. The mountain of snow moved forward, sliding across the public street, over the sidewalk, and directly onto Carolyn's front lawn. But I did not stop there. I had been plowing snow for years. I knew how to angle a blade, how to direct flow, how to make snow go exactly where I wanted it to go. With 3 precise maneuvers, I pushed the entire massive pile directly against Carolyn's front porch, burying her steps, her decorative winter planters, and blocking her front door completely. The snow rose to nearly the height of her porch railing, a solid wall of white that would take hours to clear. Carolyn was screaming now, but I could barely hear her over the sound of my truck's engine and the scraping of the plow blade. When I finished, I backed up, admired my handiwork, and rolled down the window again. "Have a great day, Carolyn. Maybe think twice before you decide to weaponize snow removal." I drove off, my driveway clear, my conscience. Well, not exactly clear, but I felt justified. I called Dave again and told him I was finally on my way to the job site. The fallout began within hours. My phone started ringing before I even arrived at the worksite in Byron. The first call was from Carolyn, which I ignored. The second was from Harold Watson, the HOA vice president, which I also ignored. The third was from a number I did not recognize, which turned out to be the HOA's lawyer, a guy named Richard Pemberton who had a fancy office in downtown Rochester and charged $300 an hour. I let that one go to voicemail too. When I finally arrived at the Byron job site, Dave took one look at my face and handed me a cup of coffee without saying a word. Dave had worked for me for 5 years and knew when I needed space. The crew could tell something was up, but they were professionals. We had a job to do, and we did it. I spent the morning ripping out old cabinets and letting my frustration fuel the physical labor. During lunch break, I finally listened to my voicemails. Carolyn's message was 3 minutes of shrieking threats about lawsuits, criminal charges, and personal liability. Harold's message was more measured but equally threatening, citing various HOA bylaws I had allegedly violated. The lawyer's message was cold and professional, informing me that I was being summoned to an emergency HOA board meeting that evening at 7, and that my attendance was mandatory per the covenants, conditions, and restrictions I had agreed to when I purchased my home. I called my own lawyer, Patricia Montez, who worked out of a small office in Rochester and specialized in property law. I had used her 3 years ago when I bought the house, and she had warned me then about the HOA's aggressive reputation. "Brandon," she said when she picked up, and I could hear the amusement in her voice, "I heard you had an interesting morning. News travels fast. Carolyn Montgomery called my office twice already, demanding I drop you as a client because of ethical conflicts. She seems to think I represent the HOA. I had to remind her that I most certainly do not. Now, tell me what happened." I walked her through the entire morning, from discovering the blocked driveway to delivering the snow to Carolyn's porch. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Well," she finally said, "you have definitely made your life more complicated. But here is the interesting thing. You might actually be in the right legally. If the HOA deliberately blocked your driveway with the intent to prevent you from accessing public streets, that is actionable. It is interference with property rights and possibly false imprisonment if you could not leave your property. The fact that you have a witness is huge. So I am not going to jail for plowing snow onto someone's porch. No, is it petty and vindictive? Absolutely. Is it illegal? That is murkier. You did not damage her property. You did not technically trespass. Her front lawn is bounded by a public sidewalk and street, and you moved snow from a public area to another public area that happened to end up on her lawn. She will argue you targeted her specifically and intentionally caused her distress, but she will have a hard time proving damages beyond the cost of snow removal, which is probably a few $100s at most. What about this emergency HOA meeting? You have to go. The CC and Articus require attendance when directly summoned for a disciplinary matter. But you do not have to go alone. I will be there with you. And Brandon, do not say anything stupid. Let me do the talking. The meeting was being held at the community center in the Lakeside Commons development, a building that served as the HOA office, meeting space, and recreational facility. It had cost the homeowners a fortune to build 5 years ago, a fact that Gerald loved to complain about since he felt his dues had doubled for no good reason. I arrived at 6:45 and found Patricia already there, sitting in her car in the parking lot. She was 46, with short dark hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent 20 years dealing with property disputes and small-town politics. She wore a professional gray suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my truck payment. "Ready?" she asked as I approached. "Not even a little bit." "Good. Channel that nervous energy into staying quiet. Remember, you say nothing unless I tell you to." The community center meeting room was set up like a courtroom, which was Patricia's first complaint as we entered. The HOA board sat behind a long table at the front, Carolyn in the center, Harold Watson to her right, and 3 other board members I barely knew to her left. There was Susan Carmichael, a retired teacher who always looked vaguely uncomfortable with Carolyn's aggressive tactics. There was Doug Peterson, a middle-aged accountant who seemed to agree with whatever Carolyn said. And there was Linda Garcia, a nurse who worked at Mayo Clinic and rarely spoke at meetings. About 20 other homeowners had shown up to watch, which was unusual. Normally, HOA meetings drew maybe 5 or 6 people. Gerald was there, sitting in the front row and looking delighted. Doris Chen sat beside him, still clutching her phone. The Webbs were there too, along with several other neighbors whose names I knew but could not quite remember in my current state of anxiety. Carolyn banged a gavel, which seemed excessive, and called the meeting to order. This emergency session of the Lakeside Commons Homeowners Association Board has been convened to address the egregious behavior of Brandon Fletcher, resident of 412 Lakeview Drive, who this morning committed an act of vandalism, harassment, and willful destruction of property against Board President Carolyn Montgomery. Patricia stood immediately. "Objection. This is not a court of law, and you do not get to make legal determinations about my client's behavior. If you wish to accuse him of crimes, file a police report. Otherwise, restrict your comments to factual descriptions and alleged HOA violations." Carolyn's face flushed, but she nodded curtly. "Fine." Mr. Fletcher deliberately pushed approximately 6 tons of snow onto my front lawn and porch, blocking my entrance and causing significant distress and inconvenience. After your contracted snow removal company deliberately blocked his driveway with approximately the same 6 tons of snow, preventing him from leaving for work and interfering with his property rights, Patricia countered. "Do you deny that the HOA's contractor blocked Mr. Fletcher's driveway this morning?" Carolyn hesitated. Harold Watson leaned over and whispered something to her. She straightened. The contractor was performing his duties in managing snow removal for the community. Any incidental impact on individual properties was unintentional. I have a witness who says the driver made 3 deliberate passes, consulting his phone as if following specific instructions, I said before Patricia could stop me. She shot me a warning look, but the damage was done. Or maybe it was the right thing to say, because several homeowners in the audience murmured their agreement. Gerald stood up. "I saw the whole thing," he announced. "It was deliberate. That driver knew exactly what he was doing, and I will swear to it in any court you want." Carolyn banged the gavel again. "Sit down, Mr. Harrison. You are not recognized." "This is not Congress, Carolyn," Gerald shot back, "and I have just as much right to speak as anyone. You have been bullying people in this community for months, and everyone is sick of it." The room erupted. Multiple people started talking at once. Susan Carmichael looked distressed. Doug Peterson was frantically taking notes. Linda Garcia just looked tired. Patricia raised her voice above the chaos. Here is what actually happened for the record. The HOA president, angered by previous disputes with my client, used her authority to direct the snow removal contractor to deliberately block his private driveway, preventing him from accessing public streets and interfering with his ability to conduct business. When my client discovered this obstruction, he legally cleared his own driveway and, staying within public rights of way, relocated the snow to a location that happened to be near Miss Montgomery's property. No trespassing occurred. No property damage occurred. No laws were broken. He targeted me specifically, Carolyn shouted, standing up. This was retaliation. Yes, Patricia agreed calmly. It was. And retaliation for unjust behavior is not illegal. You targeted him first. He responded in kind. If you do not like it, I suggest you reflect on your own actions. Harold Watson cleared his throat. Regardless of the provocation, Mr. Fletcher's actions violated several HOA bylaws. Section 12.7 prohibits any homeowner from creating visual blight or unsightly conditions visible from common areas. Section 18.3 requires all homeowners to maintain their properties in a manner that does not negatively impact neighboring properties. And Section 22.1 gives the board authority to assess fines for behavior deemed detrimental to community harmony. Patricia smiled. It was not a warm smile. Section 12.7 refers to permanent or semi-permanent installations. Snow is by definition temporary. Section 18.3 has been violated far more egregiously by Miss Montgomery's actions this morning, as blocking a driveway certainly negatively impacted my client's property. And Section 22.1, the catch-all clause you people love to abuse, has been ruled unconstitutionally vague in 16 Minnesota court cases since 2012. Would you like me to cite them? The room had gone quiet. Harold looked at his notes, then at Carolyn, then back at Patricia. We could impose a fine regardless of legal standing, and we could sue the HOA for harassment, abuse of authority, and intentional interference with property rights. I would be happy to file that lawsuit tomorrow morning. We would win, and the HOA's insurance would likely drop you, leaving all these homeowners personally liable for damages. Is that really the route you want to take? I was starting to understand why Patricia charged $200 an hour. Carolyn sat back down, her expression glacial. What do you want? An apology, Patricia said. A formal acknowledgement that the HOA's contractor acted inappropriately this morning, and a written assurance that my client will not be targeted for retaliation going forward. Additionally, the HOA will reimburse Mr. Fletcher for the 4 hours of work time he lost this morning. At his professional rate, that comes to $320. Absolutely not, Carolyn said. Then we will see you in court, Patricia replied, starting to pack up her briefcase. Wait. It was Susan Carmichael who spoke. The retired teacher looked uncomfortable but determined. I would like to make a motion. I move that the board acknowledge that this morning's incident was the result of miscommunication and overreach by the HOA's contractor, that we apologize to Mr. Fletcher for the inconvenience, and that we reimburse him for his lost time. Furthermore, I move that we conduct a review of our snow removal contract to ensure this does not happen again. Linda Garcia immediately seconded the motion. Carolyn looked betrayed. Susan, you cannot be serious. I am very serious. I have been serious for months, Carolyn. You have turned this board into your personal fiefdom, and it needs to stop. I am calling for a vote. The vote was 3-2. Susan, Linda, and surprisingly Harold voted in favor. Carolyn and Doug voted against. The motion passed. Carolyn stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the meeting without another word. The room watched her go in stunned silence. Harold cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I suppose that concludes this emergency meeting. Mr. Fletcher, you will receive a check within 10 business days. And please accept our apologies for this morning's incident." Patricia and I left the community center feeling like we had won a significant victory, but I knew it was not over. People like Carolyn Montgomery did not just give up because they lost one vote. I was right. The next morning, I discovered that the HOA had placed an orange violation sticker on my front door. According to the sticker, my property was in violation of Section 9.4 of the HOA bylaws. Holiday decorations must be removed no later than January 15th of each year. It was January 23rd and I still had my Christmas wreath on the front door. I had forgotten to take it down, honestly. It was a small, tasteful wreath that my mother had given me years ago. But technically, Carolyn was right. I was in violation. The fine was $50. I took down the wreath. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA informing me that my recycling bin had been placed at the curb 14 hours before collection time, violating Section 15.8, which specified that bins could be placed out no earlier than 6 p.m. the evening before collection. The fine was $75. I had put the bin out Tuesday morning before leaving for work because I knew I would not be home Tuesday evening. Collection was Wednesday morning. Technically, I had violated the rule. 3 days after that, I received another violation notice. This time it was for my mailbox, which apparently was the wrong shade of black. According to Section 11.2, all mailboxes must be painted approved charcoal black from the HOA's specific list of paint colors. My mailbox was just regular black spray paint from Home Depot. The fine was $100. I called Patricia. "This is harassment," I told her. "She is coming after me for every tiny infraction she can find." "Yes," Patricia agreed. "And unfortunately, most of these violations are technically valid. You did leave your wreath up too long. You did put your recycling bin out too early. And your mailbox probably is not the approved color. So what do? You comply perfectly with every single rule, give her nothing to work with, and you document everything. Every fine, every notice, every interaction. We are building a harassment case, but it takes time and evidence. Can you hold out?" I paid the fines. All of them. I repainted my mailbox with the approved charcoal black paint, which cost $40 plus the $100 fine. I set an alarm on my phone to remind me when to put out my recycling bin. I walked around my property every evening, looking for anything that could possibly be interpreted as a violation. Carolyn found things anyway. My grass was too long in one section of my lawn, even though it was January and everything was covered in snow. She claimed she could see brown grass poking through in one area, and brown grass indicated lack of maintenance. $50 fine. My truck was parked in my driveway in a manner that extended 6 inches beyond the approved parking zone, which was apparently defined by an invisible line that ran parallel to my garage door. $100 fine. I had placed my garbage bin on the wrong side of my driveway on collection day. It was supposed to be on the left side when viewed from the street. I had placed it on the right side. $75 fine. By the end of February, I had racked up over $800 in fines. I paid every single one, and I documented every single notice. Patricia assured me we were building an excellent case. Then March happened. I woke up on a Saturday morning to discover that someone had spray painted the word "jerk" across my garage door in bright red paint. I immediately called the police and reported it as vandalism. The Rochester police sent an officer, a young guy named Officer Martinez, who took photos and a statement. "You have any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I have a pretty good idea." I told him about the HOA situation, the escalating fines, the harassment. He took notes and said he would file a report, but without evidence directly linking someone to the vandalism. There was not much they could do. I spent the rest of the day painting over the graffiti. Then, I went to Best Buy and purchased a comprehensive home security camera system. By Sunday evening, I had 4 cameras installed covering my entire front yard, driveway, and garage. Monday morning, I found all 4 of my tires slashed. The cameras had caught everything. The footage was crystal clear. At 2:17 a.m., a figure in dark clothing and a ski mask had approached my truck and methodically slashed all 4 tires with a knife. The person was too covered up to identify directly, but I noticed something interesting. They walked with a distinctive limp, favoring their right leg. And they arrived and left in a white Lexus SUV that was parked just outside my camera's range, but visible enough to confirm the make and model. Carolyn Montgomery drove a white Lexus SUV. And I remembered that she had mentioned at an HOA meeting last year that she had ongoing issues with her right knee from an old skiing accident. I called the police again. This time, Officer Martinez took it much more seriously. He reviewed the footage, took a copy, and said he would follow up with the investigation. "Sir, do you feel safe in your home?" he asked. "This is escalating behavior." "I will be fine," I told him. "I just want this documented." That afternoon, I called Patricia and sent her the footage. She was quiet for a long time after watching it. "Brandon, this is serious. This is criminal activity. You need to file a formal police report and potentially get a restraining order." Officer Martinez already filed a report, and I do not have proof that it was Carolyn specifically. That is her car. That is her walking style. Any jury would connect those dots. Maybe, but I want to give her enough rope to hang herself. If I can catch her actually doing something on camera where we can see her face, then we have her dead to rights. Patricia sighed. "Please be careful. People who escalate to property destruction sometimes escalate further." She was right to be worried. 2 weeks later, someone poured sugar in my truck's gas tank. Another 4 weeks after that, someone broke my front window with a rock at 3 in the morning. Both incidents were captured on my cameras. Both showed the same figure in dark clothing and a ski mask, same distinctive limp, same white Lexus SUV dropping them off and picking them up just out of clear camera range. I upgraded my cameras. I installed additional lighting. And I started parking my truck in my garage. The police were now actively investigating, but Officer Martinez told me they were having trouble getting a warrant to search Carolyn's property or vehicle without more concrete evidence. "The thing is," he explained during one of his visits after the broken window incident, "we know it is probably her, but probably does not meet the standard for a warrant. We need something definitive. A clear shot of her face or the ski mask found in her possession, or someone willing to testify that she confessed. Until then, my hands are tied." "What if she escalates further?" I asked. "Then we respond accordingly, but Mr. Fletcher, maybe you should consider moving. This situation is not healthy." Moving felt like letting Carolyn win. I had lived in this house for 3 years. I had built a life here. My business was 15 minutes away. And honestly, the stubborn part of me refused to be driven out of my own home by a petty tyrant with a clipboard and a grudge, so I stayed. And I waited. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Doug Peterson, the accountant who served on the HOA board and usually voted with Carolyn, called me in late April. "Mr. Fletcher." His voice was shaky. We need to talk, in person, not at my house, somewhere public. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Rochester, a busy Starbucks where we could talk without being overheard in the general noise. Doug looked terrible, like he had not slept in days. He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from me, his hands trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to promise you will protect me when this all comes out." "I cannot promise anything until I know what you are talking about." He nodded, accepting that. "Carolyn has been embezzling from the HOA for at least 2 years, maybe longer. She has been using HOA funds for personal expenses, falsifying records, and paying herself unauthorized bonuses. I discovered it 3 months ago when I was reviewing the quarterly statements. That is part of my role as board secretary, to double-check the financial reports." The numbers were not adding up. My coffee suddenly tasted sour. "How much?" "At least $80,000, maybe more. I have not finished tracing everything yet." "Why are you telling me this?" Doug looked miserable. "Because I think she is going to hurt you. I think she has completely lost control. After that meeting where the board voted against her, something broke. She called me that night, ranting about how you had humiliated her, how you needed to be punished, how she was going to make you suffer. I thought she just meant more fines, more harassment. But then your tires got slashed. Then your window got broken. I put the pieces together." "Can you prove any of this? The embezzlement, I mean?" "I have documents. Copies of falsified reports, bank statements, receipts. I have been collecting evidence because I was not sure what to do. If I go to the rest of the board, Carolyn will destroy me. She knows things about my business, personal things she could use against me. But if I stay silent, I am complicit in a crime. You need to go to the police." "I know. I am terrified. But I am more terrified of what happens if I do not. So I am going to do it. Tomorrow. I just wanted to warn you first because when this comes out, Carolyn is going to know it was me, and she is going to go nuclear." I gave Doug Patricia's contact information and told him to call her before going to the police. She could help protect him legally and make sure the evidence was presented properly. Doug agreed and left the coffee shop looking slightly less terrified but still deeply shaken. The next morning, Doug went to the Rochester Police Department with his evidence. Patricia went with him. By noon, detectives were at Carolyn's house with a warrant. By evening, she was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and falsification of records. But the story did not end there. During the search of Carolyn's house, police found a ski mask in her bedroom closet. It was sent for testing, and fibers from it matched fibers found on my truck after the tire slashing. They also found a can of red spray paint in her garage that matched the paint used on my garage door. And most damningly, they found a journal where Carolyn had documented her war against me, including detailed plans for each act of vandalism. She was additionally charged with criminal mischief, vandalism, and harassment. The bail was set at $50,000. Harold Watson called an emergency HOA board meeting the next day. With Carolyn arrested, and Doug having resigned from the board in shame for not coming forward sooner, they needed to figure out how to move forward. Susan Carmichael was appointed interim president. Linda Garcia became interim vice president. They brought in a forensic accountant to fully assess the financial damage. The news hit the local Rochester papers. HOA president arrested for embezzlement and harassment campaign was the headline in the Post Bulletin. The story went semi-viral on local social media. Gerald called me 3 times that day, absolutely delighted. "I have been waiting for something like this for years," he told me. "That woman was a menace. I am just glad you finally gave her enough rope." The forensic audit revealed that Carolyn had stolen nearly $106,000 from the HOA over 3 years. She had been using the money for everything from luxury vacations to her Lexus payments to high-end shopping trips. She had falsified records so skillfully that it had taken someone with Doug's accounting background to even notice the discrepancies. Every homeowner in Lakeside Commons received a letter explaining what had happened and informing them that the HOA's insurance would cover most of the stolen funds, though there might be a special assessment to cover the deductible and legal costs. People were angry. Several homeowners were talking about a class action lawsuit against Carolyn personally. As for me, the county prosecutor's office contacted me about pressing charges for the vandalism and harassment. I met with an assistant district attorney named Jennifer Kowalski who walked me through the process. The evidence was overwhelming. Between my security footage, the items found in Carolyn's house, and her own journal entries, the case was airtight. She is going to prison, Jennifer told me plainly. The embezzlement alone is a serious felony. Add in the harassment campaign, the vandalism, the destruction of property, and we are looking at several years minimum. Her lawyer is already talking about a plea deal. What kind of plea deal? Probably 5 years in prison with possibility of parole after 3. Full restitution for the embezzled funds, restitution for all damages to your property, and a permanent restraining order. The judge might also require mental health counseling. Your input as a victim will be taken into account during sentencing. If you want to give a victim impact statement, you will have that opportunity. The legal process moved surprisingly quickly. Carolyn's lawyer, the same Richard Pemberton who had called me after the snow incident, advised her to take the plea deal. She had no real defense. The evidence was damning. In July, 4 months after her arrest, Carolyn Montgomery stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to embezzlement, fraud, criminal mischief, and harassment. I was in the courtroom that day. Patricia sat beside me. The prosecutor had asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement, and I had declined. I felt like the evidence spoke for itself, and honestly, I just wanted it to be over. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Elizabeth Morrison, did not go easy on Carolyn. She sentenced her to 6 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 4, ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA and to me personally, and issued a permanent restraining order requiring her to stay at least 500 yards away from me and my property upon her release. Miss Montgomery, Judge Morrison said before concluding the hearing, you held a position of trust within your community. You were elected by your neighbors to serve their interests, to protect their investments, and to maintain a fair and equitable living environment. Instead, you abused that trust systematically and maliciously. You stole from your neighbors. You targeted one individual with a campaign of harassment and vandalism that could have resulted in serious injury. You have shown no remorse and no insight into the severity of your actions. This court hopes that your time in prison will give you the opportunity to reflect on the harm you have caused and to develop into a better person. But that will be up to you. Carolyn was led away in handcuffs. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than the woman who had stood on her porch 6 months earlier, watching with satisfaction as I struggled with the snowbank she had deliberately placed across my driveway. That snowbank felt like a lifetime ago. The Lakeside Commons HOA spent the rest of the year rebuilding. Susan Carmichael proved to be an excellent president, focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. She organized a complete review of the HOA bylaws, removing the most ridiculous and unenforceable rules. The mailbox color requirement was eliminated. The recycling bin timing rule was relaxed. Holiday decorations could stay up until the end of January. Common sense prevailed. Gerald was elected to the board in the fall elections, which amused me greatly. The man who had spent 20 years complaining about HOA overreach was now part of the HOA leadership. He took his role seriously, though, constantly advocating for homeowner rights and reasonable regulations. As for me, I paid off my truck repairs and window replacement with the restitution money from Carolyn's plea deal. I upgraded my security system permanently, and I made a point of being more involved in the HOA, attending meetings and voting on issues that affected our community. The media attention died down by late summer. Lakeside Commons returned to being a quiet suburban development where the most exciting thing was usually someone's dog getting loose or a particularly impressive Christmas light display. The story became neighborhood legend, though. New residents moving in would eventually hear about the HOA president who went to prison and the snow plow incident that started it all. I ran into Doris Chen at the grocery store in November. She was the one who had filmed the original snow incident on her phone. The footage had never been published anywhere, but she told me she still had it saved on her cloud storage. Just in case you ever need it, she said with a smile. That was the most entertaining thing that has happened in this neighborhood in 20 years. Well, until the whole embezzlement thing came out. That was pretty entertaining too, in a horrifying kind of way. Do you still have nightmares about Carolyn showing up at your door with her clipboard? I asked jokingly. Oh, absolutely. But at least now I know she cannot actually do anything. Restraining order cuts both ways, you know. She cannot come within 500 yards of any of us who testified or provided evidence. The HOA board sent out a newsletter in December summarizing the year's events and thanking homeowners for their patience during the transition. They announced that the association's finances were now stable, that insurance had covered most of the embezzled funds, and that there would be no special assessment after all. They also announced a community party for New Year's Eve, the first social event the HOA had organized in years. I went to the party. Gerald was there with his wife Martha, telling stories about the old days of Lakeside Commons. Doris brought homemade dumplings that everyone raved about. The Webbs brought their new baby, born in October. Susan Carmichael gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support and expressing optimism about the community's future. At midnight, as we counted down and welcomed the new year, I looked around at my neighbors and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Genuine satisfaction with where I lived. Carolyn had tried to make this community her personal kingdom, ruling through fear and arbitrary enforcement. In the end, she had united us against her, and we were stronger for it. The snow came heavy that winter, as it always did in Minnesota. But this time, when the plows came through, they cleared the streets without targeting anyone's driveway. The new snow removal company, a local outfit that charged reasonable rates, did solid professional work. My driveway remained accessible all winter. I kept my Christmas wreath up until exactly January 15th, removing it the day before the supposed deadline just to be safe. Old habits died hard. But I did not paint my front door back to forest green. I kept it navy blue. Susan Carmichael had pushed through a bylaw change allowing any tasteful and complimentary front door color, which was vague enough to cover basically anything that was not neon pink. In February, I received the final restitution check from Carolyn's lawyer. It was for $6,342, covering all my property damage, lost work time, security system upgrades, and legal fees. I deposited it and took Patricia out to a nice dinner as a thank you for everything she had done. You know, she said over dessert, in 20 years of property law, I have never seen an HOA case quite like yours. Most of them end with someone just moving away or paying endless fines until they give up. You actually fought back and won. I had a good lawyer, I said. You also had persistence and documentation, and a little bit of luck. If Doug Peterson had not grown a conscience, Carolyn might have kept embezzling for years. Do you think she will actually change? In prison, I mean, like the judge said. Patricia considered that. Honestly, probably not. People like Carolyn Montgomery, they have a fundamental need to control others. It is pathological. Prison will not fix that. But at least she cannot hurt anyone in our community for the next few years. That was good enough for me. The years passed. Carolyn served her time at the Women's Correctional Facility in Shakopee. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was a model prisoner, following rules meticulously and keeping to herself. I wondered if she understood the irony. I expanded my construction business, hiring 2 more full-time carpenters, and taking on larger projects throughout southeastern Minnesota. Gerald retired from the HOA board after 2 years, satisfied that he had helped steer the association in a better direction. Susan Carmichael served 2 terms as president before declining to run again, citing a desire to spend more time with her grandchildren. The navy blue door remained. My mailbox stayed regular black instead of approved charcoal black, and no one cared. I decorated for Christmas each year and took the decorations down whenever I felt like it in January, usually around the 20th. No orange stickers appeared. No fines came. Life in Lakeside Commons became what it should have been all along, peaceful, neighborly, and normal. We had the occasional dispute about noise or property lines, but nothing that could not be resolved through conversation and compromise. The HOA existed to maintain common areas and handle actual issues, not to micromanage paint colors and garbage bin placement. On a Tuesday morning in March, nearly 4 years after the snow incident, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Minnesota area code. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Mr. Fletcher. The voice was female, uncertain, vaguely familiar. Yes, this is Carolyn Montgomery. I almost hung up immediately, but curiosity kept me on the line. You are not supposed to contact me. Restraining order. I know. I am calling from my lawyer's office with his supervision. I am not trying to violate anything. I just wanted to say something before I leave Minnesota. I am being released early for good behavior, and my parole requires me to relocate out of state. I am moving to Arizona to live with my sister. I will never bother you or anyone in Lakeside Commons again. I waited. There had to be more. I wanted to apologize, she continued, and her voice cracked slightly, for everything. For the snow, for the fines, for the vandalism, for losing my mind and making your life hell because I could not handle someone standing up to me. I have spent 4 years in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did, and I still do not have a good answer. But I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you and I hurt the entire community. And I am sorry. The apology sounded rehearsed, like something her therapist had made her practice. But there was genuine emotion behind it, something broken and sad that I had never heard in Carolyn's voice before. Okay, I said. Thank you for saying that. You probably do not believe me. You probably think I am just saying what I am supposed to say. It does not really matter what I think. What matters is whether you actually change your behavior going forward. I hope Arizona works out for you. I hope you find some peace. There was a long pause. I destroyed my life over a blue door and some petty grudges. I hope you know that I know that. I do now. Goodbye, Mr. Fletcher. Goodbye. She hung up. I sat there with my coffee processing the conversation. Part of me was angry that she had called at all, even with her lawyer's supervision. Part of me was surprised by the apparent sincerity of her apology. Mostly, I just felt tired. The whole saga had been exhausting, and I was glad it was finally, truly over. I called Patricia and told her about the call. She made a note of it, but said it did not sound like a restraining order violation since it had been supervised and Carolyn had not made threats or attempted to continue contact. "She is leaving Minnesota," Patricia asked. "Arizona. Living with her sister." "Good. Distance will help everyone move on." That evening I told Gerald about the call. He was less forgiving than I had been. "She should have apologized to the whole neighborhood," he grumbled. "She stole from all of us, not just you." Maybe she did. Maybe there are other calls happening that I do not know about. Maybe. Or maybe her lawyer just told her to call you specifically because you were the primary victim in the criminal case. Cover the legal bases, you know. He was probably right. But I chose to believe that Carolyn had meant at least part of what she said. Not because she deserved the benefit of the doubt, but because I needed to close that chapter of my life and move forward. Spring arrived in Minnesota the way it always did, slowly and grudgingly, with snow melting into mud before finally giving way to green grass and budding trees. I celebrated my 38th birthday in April with a backyard barbecue. Gerald and Martha came. Doris brought more dumplings. The Webbs brought their now walking toddler who was fascinated by my tools in the garage. Dave and his wife stopped by after work. It was simple and nice. As I stood on my back deck, watching my neighbors and friends enjoy the warming weather and good food, I thought about how different my life could have been if I had just accepted that snowbank 4 years ago. If I had cleared it quietly and let Carolyn continue her reign of petty tyranny. If I had never pushed that snow onto her porch in an act of justified retaliation that set off a chain of events leading to prison, embezzlement discoveries, and complete HOA reform. Sometimes standing up to bullies came with costs. In my case, it had meant months of harassment, vandalism, and stress. But it had also meant justice, positive change, and a community that learned to stand together against abuse of power. I would not change a thing. Well, maybe I would have invested in the security cameras earlier. That would have saved me some money on property damage. But beyond that, I was satisfied with how everything had turned out. As the sun set over Lakeside Commons that April evening, Gerald raised his beer in a toast. "To good neighbors," he announced. "And to the navy blue door that started a revolution." Everyone laughed and drank to that. My front door, visible from the back deck through the side yard, stood proud in its unauthorized but now completely acceptable navy blue paint. It was just a door. But it represented something important, the right to live in your own home without being micromanaged by petty tyrants with clipboards and too much authority. The HOA had learned its lesson. The community had learned its lesson. And somewhere in Arizona, I hoped Carolyn Montgomery was learning hers too. As for me, I learned that sometimes the right response to provocation is not turning the other cheek or taking the high road. Sometimes the right response is a snow plow, a clear conscience, and the willingness to fight back against injustice, even when that injustice comes from your local homeowners association. The navy blue door remains to this day. And every time I walk through it, I remember the snowbank, the fight, and the victory that followed. It was not about snow or paint colors or recycling bin placement. It was about refusing to be bullied in your own home. And that was a lesson worth learning, even if it had to be learned the hard way on a cold Tuesday morning in Rochester, Minnesota, when I discovered my driveway blocked by 6 feet of deliberately placed snow.